3 months ago, I learned of my uncle's passing. We weren't particularly close, but in his will he left me one of his houses, a dilapidated relic perched on the edge of nowhere. I was both touched and relieved. As a new father to twin girls, and already drowning in responsibilities, I didn't need another burden. I planned to live there only until I could sell it off. My job, which needs only a laptop and a phone, allowed me to work remotely. My wife stayed behind at her job, so I arrived alone, hoping for a brief, quiet getaway. At first, I treated it as a mini vacation, a solitary retreat in a house that creaked with history. But within days, a sinister undercurrent began to seep into every crevice of that place. Objects would vanish from where I'd left them. I caught fleeting glimpses of shifting shadows in the corners of my eyes. Time itself seemed to slip away, leaving me disoriented, as if the house were bending reality to its own grim purpose. The silence was overwhelming, the only sound my own ragged breathing echoing off barren walls. Then, one rainy afternoon, an elderly neighbor appeared at my door with a dog. She claimed she'd been dog-sitting while my uncle lay in the hospital, and by some twisted delay, thought I should have this companion. She mentioned, almost cheerily, that my uncle had just passed, as if it were only yesterday. I hesitated, but something in the dog's gentle, sorrowful eyes, his shaggy golden fur and hesitant wag, filled the oppressive loneliness. I named him Buster, and in that moment, his presence was a welcome, almost innocent light in the encroaching darkness of the house. For a few weeks, Buster was my only comfort in that sprawling nightmare. Yet even he seemed to sense that something was deeply wrong. He never set paw on the narrow staircase leading to the upper floors, always shying away, as if repelled by a malignant force. I rationalized it as a quirk of an old dog adjusting to a new environment, until the day he vanished. I remember it vividly. I was in the kitchen, opening a treat jar for Buster, when I turned my back for just a second, just a heartbeat, and he was gone. Panic seized me. I sprinted through the labyrinth of rooms, through the connected kitchen, living room, dining room, master bedroom, study, and even up the creaking stairs to the second floor. Every corridor echoed with my frantic calls, "Buster, Buster!" I searched every room, the guest room, the game room, the narrow balconies overlooking a desolate, decaying yard. There were no signs of him, no traces of paw prints, nothing to suggest he had slipped outside. I combed the surrounding neighborhood for an hour, desperation rising, until I finally returned home, and as I opened the front door, I heard the soft shuffling sound of Buster's paws scurrying from the kitchen. Relief washed over me, even as dread gnawed at my sanity. I was overjoyed, yet bewildered. How could I have lost him? That night, in a moment of misplaced comfort, I allowed Buster to sleep beside me in my bed. In hindsight, that decision sealed our fates. Days bled into nights as I threw myself into work, hoping that the increasing contracts and accolades would dispel the oppressive madness of that house. But the stress of long hours, combined with the eerie loneliness and intermittent strange noises, doors slamming in empty halls, the echo of footsteps in corridors where no one walked, began to wear away at my sanity. My phone and laptop became my only tether to the outside world, while I barely noticed Buster's plaintive whines for attention. I set alarms to keep track of time, but soon the hours dissolved into a haze of spreadsheets and client calls, punctuated by intermittent, inexplicable sounds that I dismissed as broken pipes. Then, one fateful night, as I was hunched over my laptop finishing a particularly grueling spreadsheet, a deafening slam echoed from upstairs, a sound not of metal or wood, but of something deliberate, malevolent. Buster, usually so gentle and docile, bolted up the stairs without hesitation, his low whine slicing through the oppressive silence. I nearly called the police, but the absurdity of the situation paralyzed me momentarily. Summoning all my dwindling courage, I grabbed an old dented frying pan and crept up the darkened staircase. The second floor was shrouded in unnatural darkness, the only illumination a weak, sickly moonlight filtering through closed windows. I reached a long, narrow corridor. At the end, the master bathroom door, once securely shut, now stood wide open, an invitation to something unspeakable. Buster stood motionless at its threshold, tail rigid and pointed toward the yawning blackness beyond. My heart pounded with terror, yet I forced myself forward. I flipped on the hallway light. Nothing happened. With trembling resolve, I advanced, the frying pan raised like a feeble shield. Inside the bathroom, there were no windows, only a suffocating absolute dark. My eyes slowly adjusted until, with a mounting dread, I realized I had stepped into something sticky underfoot. In a moment of desperate hope, I pulled out my cell phone to cast a meager beam of light. My hand shook violently as I turned it on, and I dropped it in horror. The floor was awash in a thick, bright red liquid that pooled around my feet like spilled blood. I bolted out of the bathroom, Buster following silently, and raced down the stairs, my mind reeling. I managed to call the police. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, their powerful flashlights slicing through the gloom like blades. They combed the upstairs rooms, and after a tense few minutes, one explained that the puddle was just rusty water from a broken pipe. Their dismissive laughter, as they clapped me on the shoulder, was the final straw. I knew I was trapped in a house that defied all reason, a house steeped in inexplicable horror. My mental state deteriorated rapidly. In the following days, I found messages scrawled in red on the peeling wallpaper, cryptic, mocking questions. Losing your mind? The words seemed to drip with fresh blood. I would wander the house for hours, packing and unpacking, only to find that every item I'd moved returned to its exact original place. Doors that I had firmly closed would swing open on their own. The oppressive silence was punctuated by unnerving bangs and the distorted echo of my own frantic shouts. In one desperate attempt to escape the cloying terror, I tried to leave the house. I fastened a leash to Buster, though he looked gaunt and haggard, his eyes haunted, and discovered that the front door, though it turned freely at the knob, refused to yield to any force. I stumbled into the backyard, where an old iron fence loomed, its bars barely spaced enough for a dog to slip through. A twisted tree, its branches like skeletal fingers, grew too close to the fence, a potential exit. Buster, with a low, guttural growl, bounded through the gap without hesitation. I, desperate for freedom, scrambled after him, every step a torment of aching muscles and rising terror. I chased Buster over a steep hill, clambering along stone-bricked paths, until, panting and disoriented, I found myself back at the house. My efforts to leave were thwarted by the inescapable shifting labyrinth of hallways inside. The house itself seemed alive, its dimensions warping, its corridors elongating into infinity. In a moment of exasperation and despair, I called the police again. The same 2 officers returned, their flashlights now flickering across walls, smeared with what I was certain was blood. Yet every search turned up nothing. No intruder, no break-in, nothing that could explain the maddening events. I reached out to my only friend in town, a childhood college roommate, and begged him to pick me up. But when I answered his call at the front door, the driveway was empty. I heard his voice over the phone, insistent that he was outside, but when I looked, Only an eerie silence greeted me, punctuated by a single scrawled message on the curb in red. Losing your mind? The horror of the situation sank deeper into my soul. I packed my belongings over and over, yet every time I tried to leave, my suitcase would inexplicably return to its original place. I was trapped in a house that was unraveling my reality. In a final act of desperation, I attempted one last escape. I attached a leash to Buster and forced the front door open. The glass door slid open with a whisper, and Buster leapt out into the twilight. I followed, scaling the iron fence with trembling limbs. As I climbed a gnarled tree branch to descend on the other side, I glimpsed something impossible. On the second-floor landing of the house, where I'd once walked, there were no stairs, only a gaping void. My mind reeled as I tumbled to the ground, every sense overwhelmed by agony and terror. Exhausted and bleeding from hidden scrapes, I dragged myself back to the house. I heard the shrill ring of the telephone in the silent kitchen. With shaking hands, I picked it up. A distorted, mocking version of my wife's voice answered, a voice that twisted her concern into ridicule, asking, "Does your tummy hurt? When's the last time you ate? I wonder what Buster tastes like." I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding with raw fear. I knew then that I was not alone in this house. The voices, the shadows, the inexplicable events were not mere hallucinations, but the malignant will of something beyond my understanding. I fought through the night, stumbling over blood-stained floors and warped hallways that stretched into endless corridors. I encountered a scene that shattered what little hope I had left. My friend, the one who was supposed to be waiting outside, had vanished, and in his place lay a trail of crimson leading to the mailbox, where, instead of a number, a single message was scrawled in dripping red. Losing your mind? My mind frayed at the edges. I found myself wandering from room to room, calling out for Buster, for help, for anything to break the suffocating isolation. When I finally mustered the strength to check on Buster, I found him lying lifeless on the cold floor, a once warm, loving companion, now reduced to a lifeless, silent mass. I cradled his head in my arms, feeling his fading warmth as my sanity began to crumble around me. In my delirium, I stole a shovel from an old outdoor closet and dug a shallow grave in the overgrown backyard. I buried Buster with trembling hands, each shovel full of earth a funeral dirge to my lost hope. I returned inside only to raid the pantry for sustenance, only to recoil as I nearly bit into what I feared was rat poison instead of cereal. The horrors piled upon each other until the house itself became an endless cycle of terror, blood, and the echo of mocking voices. Then, one day, the front door opened on its own. I stepped out into the blinding sunlight, only to find a police car sitting in my driveway, with the keys abandoned in the front seat. Clutching the keys, I fled the property, my mind a maelstrom of confusion. I drove aimlessly, taking left and right turns, until the world outside seemed to vanish, replaced by a suffocating void. When I finally awoke, I found myself slumped in an armchair in the living room of the house, my arms still raised as if holding a steering wheel. I stared in disbelief at my glowing work laptop on the dining table. On its screen was a message, typed in jagged, dripping red letters. Lost your mind? Good. Now you won't mind losing the rest. My hand trembled as I noticed a kitchen knife in my grasp, a knife I couldn't remember picking up. I dropped it immediately, horror washing over me as my own actions betrayed me. I tried to type a desperate plea for help, but my fingers stuttered over the keys. In a feverish state, the words mutated. "I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all. For the last time, Goodbye. I watched in a daze as the message grew, letters bleeding into one another, until my identity dissolved into meaningless gibberish. I could no longer recall my uncle's face, my wife's gentle smile, or even the names of my twin daughters. I was losing myself in that cursed house. Now, as I sit in this study, a room that seems to twist and distort with every passing moment, I can no longer tell if I'm awake or trapped in an endless nightmare. The house is alive with horrors, walls smeared with blood, corridors that stretch into oblivion, and voices that whisper my failures. Every time I try to escape, I find myself back here, writing these words with hands that shake uncontrollably. I don't know what force has claimed this place, or what monstrous presence lurks behind every closed door. I only know that I have lost everything: my sanity, my identity, and the only life I once knew. And now, as the final echoes of my desperate typing fade away, I am left with one inescapable truth. If I stop writing, I will disappear into this darkness forever. I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all. For the last time, goodbye. This is my last desperate cry into the void. May you, who hear this tale, beware the cursed legacy of inherited horror, where the past, the ghosts, and the blood-soaked walls conspire to strip away your very soul. And if you ever find yourself alone in a house that seems to breathe, remember, sometimes escaping means leaving behind everything you once knew, even if it's your own sanity.